Algebra 2 Honors 5.6a, and then we'll split it for 5.6b in another video. 5.6a, we're just going to look at examples 1 and 2. And we're starting to look at an inverse of a function. And an inverse function, when you square a number, the inverse function is take the square root. That's the kind of idea. If you multiply, then how you undo it is you divide. That's kind of the relationship of what an inverse is, and then we have to relate it to what an inverse function is. So in your first example here, the first set of problems, they're going to give you a function and they're going to ask you to solve for x. So y equals f of x and solve for x. So we are just going to take and let f of x be y and solve it for x. So add over y, or 5, excuse me. And then x is going to be y plus 5 divided by 3. So we've solved that function for x. And typically I would want the x on the left for my final answer. And so there is my answer. And in part B it says find the input when the output is negative 11. Well, the original problem, the x value is your input. And f of x, which is your y, is your output. So now we want to find the input, which is x, when the output is negative 11. So find the input, which is your x value, when the output is 11. And so the output is your y. And so now we have a function we can put the y value in directly to get x, which is opposite of what we normally do. And you get a negative 6 divided by 3, which is a negative 2. And so inverse functions undo each other. So for a quick example here, we have f of x is 2x plus 3, and we're saying this is the inverse. So just looking at that a little bit here, taking a look, is if I put 10 into that first function, I get out 23. And if I then take that result and put it into what we say is the inverse function, it should undo what I did. So what does that look like? You get 20 over 2, which is 10. So g of x undid what f of x did, and I'm back to where I started, which is 10. And so another thing that this is 1023 was a point on f, while when I put in 23, the output was 10, and that's g. And so when you have an inverse function, the x and the y coordinates change places. And so that's kind of what these inverse functions do. And so you're going to eventually be given some of these points and in tables, and you're going to be asked, are they inverses? And what you're going to want to look at are the x and y coordinates switch. So here we have an ordered pair, -2, -1. The inverse should switch x and y, and they do. And for every pair, so if I keep on going, I have 1, 5. If I switch those, notice that is an ordered pair on the inverse. Every one of the ordered pairs on f, if I switch x and y, those are ordered pairs on g. That is what happens on inverse functions. The other thing is inverse functions, excuse me, are reflections of the graph of the original function over the line y equals x. And so you'll see in that graph that we have the line y equals x, and when you reflect f over the line y equals x, you get the points on g. And notice that points that are on the line of reflection don't move anywhere. And so in your second set of problems, they're going to ask you to find the inverse functions. So we talked a little bit about what they are, but now we need a process for finding the inverse. And so first thing we do is we write this, replace f of x with y. And the second thing you do is you switch out x and y. Make your y x and your x y. And then you solve for y. So I'm going to subtract 8 and divide by 2. And I'm going to put the y on the left. And we have notation for the inverse function. And inverse function notation is this. And so I want to see you use that. They might not be using that in the textbook, but I want you to use it. They use g of x, I think, for the inverse. I want you to use this notation. Note that this is not the reciprocal. It is not 1 over f of x. That is not the same thing. They do not mean the same thing. It's not a reciprocal function. It's just this is read as inverse of f of x. And so you need to replace y with that inverse. Even if they don't do it in the textbook, I'm going to expect it. And so this is the inverse function of f of x. And that's what you're needing to do in your first part of the assignment for 5.6A. Look at these examples 1 and 2 and do the 1 through 19 odd. And submit the notes for example 1 and 2. You'll submit the rest of the examples with part B.